So the question was why the choice on double linked list, not on singly linked list. Um, for the purpose of this session, it's not quite very important. If we want to have support for double linked list, we add the previous field. But if we don't want to support double linked list, then we just keep the next field. I do think actually it's kind of more simpler to use simply linked list for the purpose of this session, but let's keep it that way for the moment. It doesn't make any difference regarding um, the exercise we're doing. Okay. The question is now, I understand now. Um, Here, when you are creating, where is the add product function? It's here. So how do we decide to whether we need to pass in a pointer to a pointer or just a pointer? We pass in a pointer to a variable when we want to modify the variable, the content of the variable. For example, here, if you look at it in the line 21, on the line 21, you see that we're modifying the list. This is because if you look into the main function and you call the add product function here, then you pass in the list like that, then with the other arguments. When you pass in the list, what happens is that it is the value stored in the list variable that gets passed to the function. So, which means it is null, the null value that's going to pass in here. We don't want to do that. We want to change this variable. We want to be able to change this variable from within the add product function. So we pass in the address. Then when you pass in the address of the variable, it simply means you're passing a pointer to, you're passing a data type that is of type pointer to the data type that the variable is storing. In this example, the list store a data of type product, a pointer to product, so with only one star. A pointer to this kind of data will be represented with another star sign. So we add another star sign. So this is how we determine the type of the list for the add product function. That way, since the add product function knows the address of the list variable from the main function, let's say, it can now modify the content of the variable from within here, from the scope. So from the add product function scope. So that's why we decide to pass in a pointer to the list variable. I can just name it another way. to avoid confusion, add in a P, okay, a pointer to the list. So we can modify the list from within the add product function. Okay. There are many reasons about, so it depends on the situation, but since we're going to make another session on pointers tomorrow, we're going to send the message in the groups. So we're going to start from the beginning, how variables work, till creating pointers, till more complex data structure. We're going to start since the beginning till more advanced stuff. So for now, let's go back in the search product by name. So the search product by name received the list. It doesn't need to modify the content of the list, but it needs to search in the list a product that has the same name as the um, the arguments passed in, the name argument. So what do we do? I'm going to declare a variable named cursor and name it, set it to null. Let's include the Sdr def library because we want to make use of the null macro constant. And I'm going to set the cursor to the first element of the list. So remember, the name of the list represents the name of the list, or the variable that represents the list is actually storing the value, uh, is actually storing the first element in the list. So here we have a cursor variable that we're going to use to jump from one element to another element in the list. So while we have the cursor is it null, and we're going to compare the name field of the cursor or the current element to the name, to the search argument, to the name search argument. So I'm going to use the Sdr Compare function. This will compare two strings. So if the current element is null and the current element name isn't equal to the search name, then we move to the next element. So we move the cursor to the next element. So cursor equal cursor underscore next. We need to include the the string library, because this function comes from the string.h library. And here we return the cursor. This function will return the product or null if the product of that name isn't in the list. There is another thing we might want to do, is to update the price of the product. So this will be update product price. So to update the price of the product, we first need to pass in the list because the product is in the list. Next, we pass in the name of the product we want to update. And the other next step is to pass in the price, the new price. This function is going to return an integer value. It returns 0 if the update was successful, or 0 It's going to return 1 if the update was successful, or 0 if the update wasn't successful. So we're going to say update product price. It will receive the list, which means the first element in the list. Do not get confused with the variable names. What actually matters is the type of the data the variable store. So here we have the name and the new price we want to set on the product. We need to include the header files. And I guess that is all. That's all for now. Okay. So we're going to create a variable. We call it the cursor as usual. And I'm going to set the cursor to the list, meaning that the first element in the list. And we're going to use the update price function to update the price. But we don't need to actually declare all these. We already have the search product by name. So I can declare the variable product prod equal to search product by name. We pass in the list, and we also pass in the name of the product. So if the product exists, then this will not be null. The search by name will return the product. So I'm going to say if product, then we can update the price of the product. So price equal to new price. Then here we can return 1, which means the update was successful. Else we return 0 because the product isn't in the list. Now the last step might be to print the list of products. So I'm going to add the prototypes here before we continue. So that will be product, search product by name. We pass in the list. So here we're passing the first product in the list. We're not modifying the variable, or we're not modifying the list. So we don't need to pass in a pointer to a pointer or a pointer to the list. I'm going to rename this. And here we pass in the name and we pass in the new price. Oh, sorry. This is the prototype. And the other thing is the update product price. The same thing goes here. We pass in the list, we pass in the product name, and we pass in the new price. Actually, we made a mistake here. I'm going to delete that. So here, this function search a product by name and return it. And this one, update the price of the product. So we pass in the list, the name of the product, and the price, the new price. Great. The next step would be to create a function to display the contents of the list of product. So I'm going to call it print list product list. and this will receive a pointer to the first element in the product list. The first element is, let's say, the value for the list variable, and that's it. Now create this function called print list, or let's say print products. I'm going to change the name of this function. I guess we need to have names that make sense. So print products. Okay, we have print products. We need to include the main header file. And now we define the function print product type. We pass in the list. And the next thing, as usual, I'm going to declare a variable named cursor. The cursor will allow us to move on the list. So the cursor will be set to the first element of the list. And next, so while the cursor isn't null, then we say cursor equals cursor next. But before that, we need to print the values. So I'm going to include std IO library. Then use the printf function. The printf function will display the name of the product. Okay, like that. And it will also display the price of the product, which is an integer. I'm going to add that. Okay, cursor, the current product name, and the current product price. Okay, so we can print the list of products. The next step would be when we're done using the list, we can free up the memory space by deleting the list. So I'm going to create a function, delete products. And the delete product function prototype, I'm going to add it inside the main header file. So delete products. It will receive the address of the list of products. So now we pass in the address of the list, because when there is nothing in the list, we're going to, let's say, set the list to null. So the list will be modified. So the delete product function will modify the list. So we need to pass in a pointer to the list. So let's go back here inside the delete products. Yes, delete product with an S. I'm gonna include a header file, then define the function name, delete products. Then we pass in the list pointer to the list of products. And now it's time to create variables. I'm gonna name it product type, then declare a cursor, which allows us to move on the list. We're gonna set it to null, like that. We need to include std-def library here, because we're making use of the null macro constant. Okay. So the cursor will be, let's say, set to the first element in the list. So we're going to say a pointer to the list like that, the first element in the list. Then we say while the cursor isn't null, it means we're not still at the end of the list. So we're going to move the cursor to the next element. Cursor underscore next. So before uh, before we, let's say, delete a product or an element in the list, we want to store the next element in the list before deleting the current one. Because if you delete the current one, well, you're not, you might lose the reference to the next element. So for that reason, we're going to create something called cursor prev. So this will represent the previous element, or let's say I'm going to call it deleted and set it to null. The deleted element will be the current value of the cursor. Then we move the cursor to the next element. Then now we can delete the current, the deleted element. We already created a function to delete a, an item, like a product type item. So we pass in the deleted element to this function. Uh, yes, that's true. Someone says, yes, the P list, we need to pass in a pointer to the list, because once the list is empty, we just set the list to null. So that's it. We create a cursor variable, which allows us to move on the list. You can say it's maybe the I for the arrays. So for the list, we have this variable. I name it cursor. So we save the current elements. We move on to the next element to make sure that we don't lose the reference to it. And here we delete the product. Then after that, the list, there is no product left in the list. We set it to null. So the list is modified by the delete product function. So that's why we need to pass in the address of the list variable. The list variable is nothing more than the first element of the list. Since the first element holds the reference to the next elements, and the next element also hold the reference to the other next elements, then we can move from the first element to the last element just by using the underscore next field member. So that's these are some utility function for case we can say for the list. But here we did not make use of the previous field. We didn't make use of it, but we're going to see when we need this field. Let's test all this code, and then we can move on for, let's say, hash tables. It's going to be very simple to understand. Let's test the function. So the first thing, we have our list, and we want to add product to the list. So I'm going to pass in the list, the name of the product, and the name of the product would be milk. The price, I'm gonna set it to 200 or 10. Add product. We're going to add another product. The name will be orange juice, and the price will be set to, let's say, 5. Add another product. We pass in the list, and what happened is say, okay, this will be coconut 15. Add product again. We pass in the list. Um, what other product we can add here? Glass 20, and the last product might be what else? Let's add cow meat. So I'm gonna set the price to, let's say, 15. And next we can print the list of product. Print products. We pass in the list. And once we're done printing the list of products, we can delete the list. So delete products. It's time to check if this code works. I'm going to open the terminal and test.